Now, welcome to another edition of Battle of the Heroes and Villains, where this time we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll that asked you to rank or grade Grand Admiral Thrawn. We'll then compare those results to all the other characters we've done thus far, before I then read and respond to some of your comments. But before we get to all that, you can of course already nominate or vote for which character we do next. Just respond to my pinned comment below with the name of a character you'd like to see, or vote with a thumbs up if they're already listed. Whatever comment gets the most votes in roughly the next 24 hours will be the winner. Okay, and that said, let's now get to the results of this poll, where we'll see that 59% of voters gave Grand Admiral Thrawn an A, 29% of voters then thought he was a B tier character, 9% gave him a C, which left 1% to give him a D, and 2% to give him an F. And so when we do all the math here and consider A a score of 5 and F a score of 1, Thrawn ends up with an average score of 4.42, which currently puts him into 10th place out of the 17 characters we've done thus far. And this was another character that, going into it, was kind of hard to predict where they might finish up. He's a character that people may know from a couple different sources, and by the fact that the number of votes was again a bit down, I'm going to assume there are quite a few fans out there that really don't know him all that well, or don't feel they know him well enough to really judge him. But anyway, let's now delve further into Thrawn by getting to your comments. But not before once again thanking everyone who votes, comments, and watches the videos. All of it is greatly appreciated, and it's awesome to see the list finally starting to fill out quite a bit. Anyway, let's start, as we always do, with the top rated comment, which this time came to us from Captain DC, who said, "To defeat an enemy you must know them. That's Thrawn. That's why the Force is such an enigma to him." And you're exactly right, that's the problem for Thrawn. His one real weakness, or kryptonite essentially, is that the Force is a great enigma to him. It's not something that can be easily studied or understood or quantified or then predicted. Even people, as complex as they can certainly be, Thrawn can easily enough read and understand, but the Force is forever just beyond his understanding. Next up then, and falling just 4 thumbs up shy of the top comment, we have this one from Jessica A, who said, A for artistically done. Thrawn is one of my personal favorites. He was captivating from his first appearance in Heir to the Empire. Several things set him apart from other Star Wars villains. He's a non-human who ascended to the highest ranks of the Imperial military, and his design alone is cool and unique. I also like how he's the primary antagonist despite not being Force sensitive. He's no Sith, but still possesses an incredible threat through sheer tactical genius. He's a far more calculated and in many cases more honorable villain than most others. He disciplines his subordinates for failure, rewards them for ingenuity, and doesn't sacrifice their life without reason. He commands respect rather than just fear. All in all, an exceptionally crafted character. Timothy-san, you have my respect. We also then had this comment from Inspector Who Reacts, who said, "He's a great, intelligent, threatening villain. Lacking any Force powers hardly stops him from being a force to be reckoned with." And also this one from King Snowzoo, who said, "I love how he is different from most villains in Star Wars. Unlike the Sith, he is cold and calculating instead of angry. Most definitely A tier." And I do think it's funny, almost ironic even, that part of the reason I feel why he's so popular or beloved is because he's really nothing like a Sith. He's nothing like the quote-unquote usual villain of Star Wars. How he acts, how he treats others, what his motives are, his tactics, they're completely different from a Sith, and it's almost a sort of refreshing change, perhaps. And yet it was actually a Sith, Sidious, or Palpatine, whatever you want to call him, who recognized his value, or the value of an individual such as Thrawn, who put him in the position of power or gave him the rank. So not only is Thrawn quite obviously brilliant, but it further shows how intelligent Palpatine is for not only recognizing that brilliance, but understanding how useful it could be, how needed it was in the Empire. All around, Thrawn is such an amazing addition to the canon, new or old. That then sort of brings us to this comment from Bad Boy Orange, who said, "In Rebels, Thrawn is intimidating, but what really sets him apart is the EU. Even though he is a villain, he is almost inspiring in a way. I mean, Palpatine set a strict no aliens rule in place for the Empire, but Thrawn was so impressive that he was able to not just join the Empire, but become an admiral. You've got to really be something if you can make the Emperor set aside one of his most strict rules." We also had this comment from Gamer Southern 99, who said, "They nerfed him in Rebels. He's not nearly as powerful as he should be." And you know, I remember being super excited the moment I found out Thrawn was coming to Rebels, and then a couple moments later I was thinking, how is this show going to do a character like Thrawn justice? How is Rebels, a very, very kid-friendly show, going to accurately portray this character? And don't get me wrong, I think Rebels did a fantastic job with a character like Darth Vader. The show really captured him perfectly, but it also used him very, very sparingly. And when he did show up, when Vader was around, it took everything the heroes had just to escape with their lives. But Thrawn was going to end up being a much bigger part of the show. He was going to be in there way more often and really become the main antagonist of the last 2 seasons, which risked turning him into another General Grievous from the Clone Wars, where in that show it seemed like Grievous was constantly fleeing from the heroes, shaking his fist and promising, "I'll get you next time." And that did kind of happen to Thrawn in Rebels. They didn't quite capture him as I think he should have been. They certainly got the core or the essence of the character right, but he felt like Thrawn Light or Diet Thrawn. There was just something missing from him, something not quite like the original. The taste was a little bit off. Alright, next up here we have this comment from Silas Folly, who said, "I've been reading through the new canon Thrawn trilogy, and his character has absolutely blown me away, even more so than he did in Rebels." We also had this comment from Revan03, who said, "Thrawn in the Zahn trilogy, Legends, and canon is the true Thrawn we all know and love. The calm and calculated villain who defeats his enemies by exploring their weaknesses. Even though the Legends trilogy is miles better, the canon trilogy still captures the essence of Thrawn's character, something Rebels failed to do." And I do certainly agree that Thrawn in the new canon trilogy is portrayed better than he was in Rebels. It feels much more like the Thrawn of old, which is no surprise because this new canon trilogy was written by Timothy Zahn, who of course gave us the original Thrawn trilogy back in the day. And despite Rebels maybe not giving us the best version of Thrawn, I still ended up liking him overall in that show and being generally happy to see him brought into the new canon. It was cool to see him on screen and to hear him. Even though one of the things I love about Thrawn, or the way Zahn writes him I should say, is that he lets us into his mind. He lets us see the world through Thrawn's eyes and takes us through the process or steps of his thinking, which of course simply cannot be captured the same way on screen. Alright, and moving on now, we have this comment from Mr. Dr. Professor 4, who said, "I wish the sequel trilogy had been a loose adaptation of Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy. I would have taken Lucas's version over what we got, but the Thrawn trilogy would still have been my first choice." We also had this one from The Dark Master, who said, "He was one of the best EU characters post the original series. It is truly a shame that they did not use his books as a basis for the sequels." And though I certainly think going with the Thrawn trilogy would have made for a better sequel trilogy than what we actually got, I don't know that I would have wanted them to copy and paste it and give us the exact same story, or one even very close to the same story. Not that they really could have given us the Thrawn trilogy because all the actors were far too old anyway, but I think the one thing the sequel trilogy kinda did get right, if you will, is that it should have partly been about the next generation at the start, and mostly about them in the long run or at the end of the story. The Thrawn trilogy, however, is just strictly a continuation of the original trilogy characters' stories, which is awesome, don't get me wrong. I certainly loved it. It was my introduction to the EU almost 30 years ago now, which is crazy to think. So instead of making it the sequel trilogy, I wish they could have found a way to maybe adapt it into the new canon anyway, and give us a different sequel trilogy altogether, one that had been based on certainly elements of the EU, but that was also new and a little different. Either that, or I would have gladly taken what Lucas had in mind just so he could finish his story. As I've said before, letting him do that could have even been a win-win type scenario for Disney. I mean, if Lucas does the sequels and everyone loves them, well then I think people would feel content that George Lucas himself began and ended the story of the Star Wars saga, and we could all move on from that. If we fans hated what Lucas had done with them, well, we would have likely been even more accepting of whatever Disney decided to do next with Star Wars. Okay, and now let's get to just a few final comments, starting with this one from Kyle Carrasco, who said, "Thrawn is probably one of the most intelligent and cunning characters in all of Star Wars. He is the definition of being 5 steps ahead of everyone, and even when it seems as if you have won, you are just falling right into his grasp. He is also incredibly skilled not just in terms of tactics, but in terms of combat as well." Then we had this one from Michael Shepard, who said, "He was such a threatening antagonist, he actually broke the show. Rebels had to make other Imperial officers incompetent in order to keep Thrawn beatable." Then this one from Armin Tabari, who said, "The canon version is good, but it pales in comparison to his EU version." We also had this one from Year-Long Giant, who said, "He's a pretty cool character, even if I only know him from the Rebels show. He was a pretty great antagonist for his near-flawless strategies and learning of his opponents through art, Thrawn only ever fails because of his subordinates, incompetence, or space whales. And our final comment, well, I think I'll let Grand Admiral Thrawn speak for himself here. I think there are many who either have only seen him in Rebels or simply haven't read or watched much of him at all. It is for these reasons I believe Thrawn is underrated in his scoring, even with his already fairly high votes. Popularity can many times overshadow the true quality of a character, and having originated in the old EU books with his only on-screen presence being in a Disney animated kids show, less known and loved than the Clone Wars, puts him a little at odds with some of the other characters. Say there existed live-action movies of most of the Thrawn books where the films and Thrawn were done justice. He would become 3rd place instead of 9th or 10th place. As for Thrawn in the Disney stories, he actually isn't done badly, even in Rebels, but he also simply is not the same as in the EU. This alternate version and loose criteria to judge by also adds to the somewhat lower side of the votes, if only a little. The same can be said of other characters that have and will be reviewed and voted on. And I will agree that maybe the biggest flaw of the way we do this, or the way I set it up, is that there are several characters, most of them actually, that have different sources and in some cases even completely different iterations altogether. And so a lot of these characters are hard to judge overall, especially if you've only seen them in one place or the other, or know only one iteration. I mean, in the case of Thrawn, I'd personally give him an A when looking at just the old EU trilogy, but the Thrawn from the new canon, and in particular Rebels, probably I'd give him somewhere between a B and a C, maybe a B-. And oddly, I think I'd like the new canon version of Thrawn better if I didn't know the old version. I think I'd judge him less harshly if I didn't know what he was originally like. In other words, yes, everyone's coming at these rankings with a slightly different perspective and or understanding of the character, but overall I do think these rankings reflect, pretty well, the overall feeling from the fanbase in regards to these characters. And I do think when we examine old canon and new canon Thrawn, that he ended up getting about the score he deserves. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of Thrawn or what I or anyone else had to say about him here in this video. Or you can, of course, nominate or vote for which character we do next. Either way, do leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.